Item 2, I'm pleased to bring before you today item 2, which is a consideration of the conveyance of approximately 29,000 acres of state-owned lands to the National Park Service in the Big Cypress National Preserve and addition. This item was previously deferred from the September 28, 2010 BOT meeting. At that time, several of you asked that we do two things: that we work with the National Park Service to ensure that the general management plan be published, and to bring the item back to you at this meeting to report on the status. I'm happy to report to you today that the plan was published on November 23, 2010, and copies were hand-delivered to each of your offices. Many people in state and federal government, as well as interested stakeholders, have worked extremely hard to get where we are today. Some of them are here today and wish to be heard. None of this would be possible without the input of the local community, particularly Commissioner Ron Bergeron, who's here with us today, who has been an active participant in the process, and through his leadership on the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, he's worked very closely with the National Park Service on many issues as we move through this process. His role in representing the importance of traditional and recreational values has been critical in reaching this point today. Board approval of this conveyance will realize the shared vision of former Governors Askew, Graham, and Childs, current and former congressmen, and a multitude of other stakeholders, including Nathaniel Reed and the late Johnny Jones, representing the people of the state of Florida and the nation. It will facilitate enhanced management of the Big Cypress National Preserve, result in approximately $4 million for deposit into the trust fund for the state of Florida, comply with former commitments, agreements, and federal legislation, and allow the public to fully enjoy and experience the lands in the addition with recreational access, which cannot be accomplished until the board takes this action. Governor Reuben Askew wanted to be here today, but he was unable to make it. While governor of Florida in 1972, Governor Askew requested the federal government to save and acquire the Big Cypress Preserve and to ensure that preservation, conservation, and protection of the natural scenery, flora, fauna, recreational values of the Big Cypress watershed, and to protect the area as a source of water to the Everglades National Park in Collier County. He helped to spearhead passage of the Big Cypress Conservation Act of 1973 in the Florida legislature. Governor Askew has written a letter today which Ernie Barnett would like to read to you.
Governor, members of the Cabinet, Governor Askew sends his regrets, but he did ask that I would read this on his behalf. In a letter dated December 6, 2010, Dear Trustees, I am providing this letter in support of the donation and conveyance of state-owned land in the Big Cypress National Preserve as described in Item 2 of the Board of Trustees agenda. While Governor of Florida in 1972, I went before the Senate Interior Subcommittee of Parks and Recreation to request help from the federal government to save and acquire the Big Cypress Preserve and to ensure the preservation, conservation, and protection of the natural scenery, the flora and fauna, and the recreational values of the Big Cypress watershed, and to protect the area as a source of water for Everglades National Park and Collier County. To demonstrate Florida's strong commitment, we pledged funding and lands to make the Big Cypress Preserve a reality. At my request, joined by the late U.S. Senator and Governor Lawton Chiles, Senators Phil Lewis and Bob Graham spearheaded the passage of the Big Cypress Conservation Act of 1973 in the Florida legislature, authorizing $40 million of state bonds to be spent to initiate the purchase of the Big Cypress. The Big Cypress Conservation Act was passed in the Florida House on May 24, 1973, and in the Florida Senate on May 31, 1973. In 1974, the Governor and Cabinet entered into an agreement with the United States Department of the Interior and made the commitment to acquire, donate, and convey all state-owned lands in the preserve for the conservation and protection of natural resources and the scenic beauty of the Big Cypress area of Florida. The 1973 Act was subsequently amended to include land in the addition, which was added to the preserve boundary in 1988. The contribution of $40 million for the Big Cypress Preserve coming from the state of Florida garnered the support in Congress, and in 1974, Congress passed the bill and sent it to President Richard Nixon, authorizing the federal government to spend $150 million to purchase the Big Cypress National Preserve. On October 11, 1974, under the leadership of President Gerald Ford, the Big Cypress National Preserve came into being. The Big Cypress National Preserve includes over 720,000 acres and is referred to as the Western Everglades. The area contains some of the most important habitat remaining on the planet for the Florida panther. It is also one of the most important water resources and recreational areas in Florida. The conservation and protection of these lands is imperative for Florida's future. the National Park Service is known for its stewardship and conservation of land in Florida and throughout the nation. I am confident that the National Park Service management of these important resources will ensure their enjoyment for future generations to come. Florida and the National Park Service should be proud of their historic and ongoing commitment to the protection of the valuable resources of the Big Cypress. Thank you in advance for your consideration and hopefully your approval of the donation and conveyance of lands in the National Park Service and fulfilling Florida's commitment for the protection of the Big Cypress Preserve that we made over 38 years ago. Respectfully submitted, Ruben O.D. Askew. And it was my honor to read that into the record.
We have a number of people who would like to speak today, and I'm going to start with Superintendent Pedro Ramos from the Big Cypress Preserve.
Well, thank you, Madam Secretary. Mr. Governor, members of the Cabinet, it's a pleasure to be here before you today with my flat hat. And I'll be frank with you in saying that I feel like a little bitty sapling coming after both of those letters were read. Two very, very tall sequoias from the West. Two very fine men that did so much for Florida and its environment. I was going to be scripted here, but I'm going to go off the heart in telling you that this dialogue about Big Cypress National Preserve is a 40-year-old dialogue. Maybe some would argue a lot longer than that. It's a dialogue that is truly centered around the collective commitment that we have all made, the state of Florida, the people of Florida, of course, the federal government, and the people of our country that love this place so much. And it is centered around that commitment to protect and preserve those natural and recreational values that are so important to the people of Florida. In this place that many would argue is the most biologically diverse piece of real estate in the Everglades. Some may even contend in the world. I may agree with that. Many years ago, I was just a child when the Florida legislature in the early 70s passed a bill deliberately acted to purchase and donate lands to the state of Florida in conjunction with the creation of Big Cypress National Preserve. And the Congress of the United States then acted accordingly and in response to the commitment and the call from the state of Florida by passing the act in 1974 that created Big Cypress National Preserve, a gem of a place that became the first national preserve in the national park system. It was truly a unique exercise of compromise back then between Congress, Florida, and the people. A place that would be managed a little different than other national parks within an agency that was already about 70 years old. In about 5 years, will be 100 years old. That decision was made to make this place a different animal within a system of parks, if you will, because Congress wanted to make the commitment to not only protect the natural values of this very special place, but also continue providing the connection that people of the state of Florida and people of our country want to have with this place in terms of recreational opportunities. And yes, that includes off-road vehicle access and hunting, fishing and hiking and biking, horseback riding, you name it. And these are all responsibilities that we not only take very seriously and embrace, but that we celebrate. And I mean that. We celebrate and we are proud of what we are, of being a preserve. That is fully reflected in the final plan that was delivered, that was released a couple of weeks ago, in which that broad range of activities that Congress and the state of Florida many years ago, several governors and so many other elected officials and the people of this state asked us to do. The plan is fully consistent with all of that, and we look forward to implementing that plan in partnership with the many stakeholders that we have in the state of Florida. The partnership with the state of Florida, Mr. Governor and members of the Cabinet, is strong and long-term. It's not going to go anywhere. We have been working in partnership with each other for many years. Over the past 4 years, We have brought it up several notches. And it has been a pleasure to have worked with Mike Soul over the past 4 years. Mike provided tremendous leadership, not just on Big Cypress issues, but on environmental issues affecting our great state. And now it's been a pleasure to work with Secretary Drew, who has been delightful to work with, and I look forward to continuing to work with her and her staff in implementing this plan. I must also mention that our partnership with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission is in a big way why we are here where we're at in terms of managing Big Cypress as it should. The friendship and the partnership with Chairman Barreto and Commissioner Bergeron, who is here today because he's passionate about this place. I don't know of anybody that cares so much about that gem of a place that we call Big Cypress as Ron Bergeron. He has provided a tremendous amount of leadership and guidance and historical context and passion that has helped us in the National Park Service understand certain things that we need to understand if we want to be good stewards. The executive director, Nick Wiley, with whom I have there's no daylight between us. It's an open book when we're talking about issues of common interest, and we're committed to continuing that approach. At the end of the day, the commitment that we make to make Big Cypress complete, to secure all of the lands within its boundaries, and to do the right thing for them, is a promise that we make to future generations, my kids, your kids, and their kids, generations ahead, to leave this place and be good stewards of it together and leave it in better shape than we are enjoying it today, so that people in the future, well beyond our time, can be enriched by that so very special place that we call the Big Cypress Swamp, as much as our lives are being enriched by it today. So with all that said, I'd like to encourage you very respectfully to consider this item before you favorably so we can deliver on that promise. We're an agency that has done a great job, in my opinion, maintaining and preserving and being stewards of all of the places in our country that tell the story of who we are as Americans. And Big Cypress is one of those places. So thank you very much for your service over the past 4 years, your leadership and your partnership with the federal government. I appreciate your opportunity, the opportunity that you've given me to speak to you today. Thank you.
Of course, thank you.